folks at the National Drought Mitigation Center and National Weather Service. It looks at not only what happened, but the impacts and quite a bit of detail what happened during that particular drought. So it just came out. It took us a while to collect all the numbers, and we weren't quite sure in 2013 if the drought was over or not. So I kind of had to wait a while to make sure everything was settling back down. So you can get that report on the number of locations, but probably the National Drought Mitigation Center is probably the best place to get that. So if you look at the temperature ranks for December, pretty much across the central region and really across the United States, December was a pretty mild month. Many places had much above average on the temperature side, and you get farther west, and it's even warmer out there. But for the most part, it's a very warm month. In stark contrast to November, which is one of the coldest months in quite a while there. So a big contrast between the coldness of November and the warm conditions in December. If we look at the rankings for the whole year, you can see that we had a number of states in the central region that were some of their coldest years on record. In fact, Illinois, it was the sixth coldest, and many of the surrounding states there in the central part of the central region there were in the top 10 or top 12. And even then you go farther west, and it wasn't quite as severe the farther west you go, get out into the high plains, not quite as severe there, and you go on farther west, it gets even warmer and warmer. So it's kind of interesting we had such a stark contrast between the. So getting back to the story here, as far as the statewide average temperature rankings for the 2014 period, the entire year, we had one of the coldest years on record across the central part of the state and one of the warmest years on record in the western part of the U.S. And you take those two together, you end up with the 34th warmest year on record. So a very unusual case to see kind of this bipolar disorder for the U.S. in 2014. If you look at kind of picking on Illinois, since it was the coldest of the cold states in 2014, to see how that shapes up, if you look at it, really goes against the trend that we've been seeing in Illinois and pretty much across the central U.S. of this pattern towards milder winter weather and milder warmer years on average. And so it really was a standout year for us, and really had to go back to the 1970s to see something that was comparable in those numbers. So it really goes against the grain of what we've experienced temperature-wise across the central U.S. Look at the statewide precipitation ranks. It was fairly wet across the central part of the U.S. In 2014, you look at the numbers there on the rankings, it was actually some of the much above average on the precipitation, and some of them were actually close in Wisconsin and Michigan of being some of the wettest years on record. We have 120 years worth of data, so that kind of gives you a sense of where some of those states line up. So very wet conditions overall across the central part of the United States. But one of the things that's been kind of noteworthy about this winter has been that we've had a very quiet winter in terms of snowfall across the central United States, especially compared to last year. So if you look at places like Chicago this year, we've had 13.7 inches. This time last year, we had 35 inches. And the long-term average is 14.2 inches. So a little bit below the average and much below what we saw last year. And you can see kind of the same pattern across much of the central region. The areas in tan or beige, or whatever you want to call that color there, is about 1 to 10 inches below average. And so we have large stretches across the central part there that are in that category. You only have to go up to the northern part of Wisconsin and the upper peninsula of Michigan. You see much above average snowfall there. There's a few spots in Iowa, but then if you go westward, there's actually more snowfall out of the Dakotas and Nebraska and Wyoming and Montana there. So farther west you go, you get a little closer to average on the snowfall, but this is in stark contrast to about this point last year where we had a large swath of the central region that were 10 to 20 inches or more above average on snowfall. So very snowy conditions last year, not so much this year. But, you don't have to always get your precipitation from snowfall in the colder time of the year. You get some rainfall events in there, and that can really change the picture. If you look at the precipitation, so that's the rainfall and the water equivalent of the snow for that same time period, that September through yesterday time frame, you can see that parts of Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa have been a little bit above average on precipitation, as well as parts of western Nebraska and Colorado and Wyoming. Meanwhile, there's some very dry conditions up in the Dakotas and Minnesota. So that area of the central region is fairly dry right now. We'll show some more on that in a minute there. But the main point I was trying to make is that even though we haven't had that much snowfall, we're still not that far off in terms of precipitation across much of the region. This is what the snowfall looks like right now. Pretty much the northern half of the central region is covered with some amount of snow, but it gets pretty ragged by the time you get into Kansas and Missouri and the southern half of Illinois and Indiana and Ohio, and you're pretty much snow-free in places like Kentucky and points southward there. So snow cover is kind of limited at this point. If you look at the water content of the snow, it's pretty modest. Most places, I don't know if you can tell in the shading here, but it's kind of a pinkish color there. That's all just about from a trace to an inch of water content in that snow. So pretty much the whole central region that has snow cover doesn't have that much water content in it. So it's just not very much snowfall to begin with. You have to go out to Colorado and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to see some substantial snow water equivalents there. And if you look at the forecast for the next couple of days, this is probably the hottest day in the next couple of days with our January thaw, I guess you'd call it. Saturday's highs are going to be, well up into the 40s and 50s and much of the area. And even the areas that are snow-covered are going to be in the 40s and 30s. So I think we're going to see a pretty significant reduction in the snowfall across the central region at the lower elevations in the next couple of days. This is going back to the last 30 days on the precipitation side, and really, this time of year we don't get that much precipitation anyway. So, many areas it's, a quarter of an inch to half an inch or maybe an inch in the last 30 days. And you really have to go farther east to see some of the bigger amounts. We had some more significant rainfall and snowfall amounts actually tracking through the southern part of the region through Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. If you look at the departures from average, like I said, we're pretty much, because this is kind of the drier time of the year, we're not that far off from average. In fact, we have several areas that are slightly above average across much of the region. There's a few dry spots in the last 30 days up in the Dakotas and Minnesota, and then down in Missouri and Kansas have also been a little on the dry side as well. So that's where we're seeing some of the biggest departures. But, the last 30 days, overall, fairly wet conditions. You look at the temperature departures, for the most part, we've been fairly cold. And I would say, this incorporates the second half of December, which is very warm, and the first half of January, this is very cold. So a lot of that really cold air probably is more attributed to the really cold January time frame. And there's several places on the western half of the central region that are 6 to 8 degrees below average. The rest of the region is about 2 to 4 degrees below average. So overall, we've been running fairly cold over the last 30 days as we move forward here on the stream flows. This is the USGS stream flow map. And I always like to look at stream flows because it kind of gives you an overall picture of what things look like in the hydrologic cycle. If you got good stream flow, that usually means that soil moisture and groundwater levels are also in pretty good shape too. And pretty much where we have the reports in the central region, things are looking pretty good across the eastern half of the region. You see some of the reds there. That means the flows are on the low side, and that's mostly in pretty much in the Kansas area that's seeing the lower numbers. The rest of the region is in the green, which is near average, or actually in the blue, which is well above average. you look at ice cover over the Great Lakes region, that's, this last year we had, because of the early cold temperatures and the long cold stretches of cold last year, we had pretty significant ice cover over the Great Lakes. This year it's a little slow to start. It was things really started to cool off in November, obviously, but December was warm, so we kind of reversed course there. And really, it's only Lake Erie that's got a significant amount of ice cover in many of the smaller bays and regions of the other Great Lakes. So there's a lot of open water there across the Great Lakes still, so that means there's still plenty of opportunities for lake effect snows. And really, the interesting case was Lake Erie. They actually had what they call a flash freeze on Lake Erie because of the really cold temperatures in the last week or two in January, in the single digits in much of that region. And Lake Erie is the shallowest of the Great Lakes, so it's more like it's probably closer to a farm pond than it is the Great Lakes in terms of the depth. So it can freeze up pretty fast if it has cold enough temperatures. And so this is a plot of the percent of ice cover from January 1st through yesterday, and it literally goes from 0 to about 90% in the course of 2 weeks there. So just an incredible change in the ice cover over the Great Lakes. This is a plot of the water levels on Lake Superior, and the color coding here is the red is where we are in the last 2 years, and the blue line is the long-term average, and then they've got the record highs and lows there. And back in 2012 and 2013, the big story on Lake Superior was they actually had fairly low lake levels, near record lows in some cases there. But in the last half of 2013 and on into 2014, we've actually caught back up, and right now we're actually above average on lake levels on Lake Superior. So not record highs, but they are well above average. And so that's quite a turnaround in the last 2 years on lake levels there. So that was giving the shippers and the marinas fits with the really low lake levels, and that's certainly reversed course. Same story for Lake Michigan and Huron, which are connected. And those two lakes have been really low in the last 2 or 3 years, and they showed a nice rebound in 2014 and now are actually above average on the numbers there. And most of that was because we had a fairly wet year in 2014, and we had the really cold winter, which sealed off the lakes from evaporation losses last winter. So all that helped, and the lower temperatures even during the summertime last year, all helped to bring those lake levels up. The same story for Lake Erie. Lake Erie was pretty close to average anyway, and so it's also running a little bit above average as well. This is just a kind of glance at the 4-inch soil temperatures across the Midwest and the central region. This is a fairly new product at the Midwestern Regional Climate Center, trying to aggregate all the mesonets around the various states, also looking at CRN sites and looking at the 4-inch soil temperature under sod. And the color coding there, you kind of see that the darker blues are about 30 to 35 degrees, so just right about at the freezing mark in Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. Farther north you go, they are seeing frozen soils as you move northward, especially in the Dakotas and Minnesota. That's probably no surprise. So starting to see some frozen soils, not like we saw last year where it was early and often we saw frozen soils. This year it's a little bit late, and probably some of it's going to thaw back out in the next couple of days. This is the western snowpack. We're kind of right on the edge here of as far as the central region goes, but the numbers that we see in Wyoming and Colorado are all looking pretty close to the long-term average. The percentiles are, the areas in green are in the 90 to 109% of the long-term average. So those sites are pretty good. There's a few basins in Wyoming that are a little on the low side. But overall, the snowpack looks pretty good in the far west, which is a little in contrast to what we've seen in the rest of the region there. And if you look at the Missouri River Basin, the snowpack water content is pretty much on track to the long-term average. We're about 105% both above and below Fort Peck there on the Missouri River. So very good conditions on the snowpack, so no real worries there. Now, if we look at the U.S. Drought Monitor, this is the latest one from there, you can see that, earlier we were talking about some of the dryness up in the Dakotas and Minnesota, and that's reflected in the Drought Monitor. You can see that's an area of abnormally dry conditions. Also some drought conditions lingering in the Colorado and Kansas area, and a small streak kind of in that southeastern part of Missouri and western Kentucky and southern Illinois there. So there's kind of a few areas of dryness and a little bit of drought in the Midwest, but not a whole lot at this point in time. Next, we'll look at all the climate outlooks, and we're look at things out for the next couple of weeks, out to the next couple of months, and also look at the drought outlooks. So kind of looking at very quickly here on the precipitation side, this is the estimated precipitation for the next 7 days. And really for the central region, there's not a whole lot to talk about. It's fairly quiet again. Expected amounts are only about in the tenth of an inch, kind of the light green shading there, and a quarter of an inch in the slightly darker green there. So really not much going on in the central region. All the action is on the east and west coast right now as far as the precipitation expected in the next 7 days. So we're probably not going to see too much change in the things like the precipitation departures or any kind of recovery of dry conditions in the next 7 days. This is a 6 to 10 day forecast, and here we're looking at on the left panel is temperature, and the right panel is precipitation. And they always like to look at the 6 to 10 day and 8 to 14 day forecast because they give you a good sense of what the trends are like. So it's not a detailed day-to-day forecast, but it gives you a sense of what direction you're going in. And we can see there that we've got an area of coldness kind of in the Rocky Mountains portion of the central region. But for the most part in the central region, what we've got is this area of increased chance of above average temperatures, basically from the Dakotas all the way down to Missouri. And then you go farther eastward, and it's going to revert back to something close to normal on the temperature side. On the precipitation side, we have this large area of green coloring. That's the above average precipitation. So pretty much the Great Plains and the upper Midwest are expected to be on the wet side during this time period, and then drier conditions prevail in the kind of that southern part of the central region, Missouri and in Illinois and on into Arkansas there. So that's kind of the area that we did have some dry problems, and it looks like that's going to continue a while longer. But I could see some precipitation, and especially in that needed area of the Dakotas and Minnesota region. Look at the 8 to 14 day forecast. On the left panel is the temperature again. A large stretch of blue, which is the probability of below average, increased probability of below average temperatures, basically running from Colorado and Wyoming and kind of looping around there across the south and back up into the eastern part of the central region of below average temperatures. The rest of the area is expected to be near average on temperatures. On precipitation, you can see there's a large band of above average precipitation expected from the Great Plains, and again, kind of looping down across Texas and back up the East Coast. And much of the Midwest is actually an increased chance of below average precipitation during this time period. So it could be pretty quiet and kind of chilly in the Midwest, and a little more active as we go in the West and in the Great Plains region. So El Nino, it seems like for the last year we've been talking about the arrival of El Nino, and it's still in the neutral phase right now. Actually, the sea surface temperatures are close to an actual El Nino event, but the circulation in the atmosphere has not reflected that. So it really hasn't, we haven't seen any kind of an effect from the warm temperatures out there in the Pacific Ocean at this point in time. So it's not really, it's close on the index, it's really not that close as far as an actual El Nino playing out. So still a 50 to 60% chance over the next 2 months, but then the neutral phase is expected to kick in after that. So if we even get it, it's going to be very short, and it's going to be pretty weak, and I don't think it's going to be much of a factor in our coming spring and winter and spring months here. So speaking of that, we'll start looking at the outlook. So this is the one for February. These are the ones that are all released today. If you look at the central region, there's a large area of what we call equal chances. So it's equal chances of above, below, and near average temperature. And on the right-hand panel, equal chances of above, below, and near average precipitation. So there's a large part of the central region that is kind of a neutral forecast there, but we do see on the west coast and extending on into the Rockies an increased chance of above average temperatures, and we also see in the precipitation panel across the Colorado, Kansas area an increased chance of above average precipitation in February. So that's the story for February, and I always kind of tell people that one way to interpret the EC is that what it's really saying is that there's no indication or no strong evidence that we're going to be too abnormally cold or abnormally warm in those areas, or on the precipitation side, too wet or too dry. So it's EC, it sounds like we're not saying anything. What it's really saying is that we're not seeing any indication of it departing too far from what we would expect on average. So it's not necessarily a forecast for average conditions, but it just means a lack of evidence for anything else. If you look at the February through April time frame, now it gets a little more interesting. Still see the colder than average temperatures in the Kansas and Colorado region, but the warmer temperatures starting to creep into the central region. There's an increased chance in Montana and Wyoming and North Dakota there. And on the precipitation side for that 3-month period, the southwestern U.S. is spilling on into Colorado and Kansas of above average precipitation. So Colorado and Kansas kind of looks like the combo of cooler and wetter, and then the rest of the region there is mostly EC for equal chances. Step forward a little bit. They do 3-month forecast, and they actually slide them forward every month. So you can actually look at a whole suite of these, and we're not going to look at all of them, but we'll look at some of the more interesting ones. So, we were just looking at the February through April. Now we're sliding forward a little bit and looking at the April through June, a little bit of overlap there. And what's interesting about this one is that we now see this band of above average temperatures really stretching from Montana all the way across the upper Midwest and onto the East Coast there. So increased chance of above average temperatures across that region. And then on the precipitation side, really not too much going on for most of the central region. There is still that increased chance of above average precipitation in that southwestern part of the southwestern corner. Here's stepping forward again just a little bit. Here's the May through July forecast, and they got warm temperatures out on the west coast and expected increased chance of above average temperatures pretty much in the eastern part of the Midwest, kind of the Great Lakes region, all the way up into the northeast part of the United States. So kind of two parts of the U.S. there that have the expected increased chance of above average temperatures. On the precipitation side, you still see that area in the southwest there with an expected increased chance of above average precipitation. But for the rest of the U.S., it's actually equal chances on that. So fairly neutral forecast there. Now we look at August through October, so now we kind of step forward again here, and we're again just kind of picking out the more interesting maps. So this is the one that has this really interesting pattern on the temperature side of increased chances of above average temperatures west, and including the eastern or western part of the central region there, and then also increased chance of above average temperatures across part of the Great Lakes and points eastward there. And then the central part of the U.S., where most of the central region resides, is actually in the equal chances there. So Again, kind of a strong contrast there between what they're expecting to the east and west coast versus the central U.S. And precipitation-wise, it's equal chances. And I will say that, they've looked at a number of things for these forecasts. Obviously, El Nino's not going to be a player in this, so they've looked at a number of the climate models and then the trends analysis to come up with this particular pattern. And it's probably no surprise that there isn't much signal on the precipitation side. There's usually less signal there, especially in the warmer season, than on the temperature side. Here's the monthly drought outlook. So this is for what to expect in the next month. And really, they could summarize it pretty quickly in just saying that they expect the drought conditions to persist for the next month in the areas that have drought, including the parts in Colorado and Kansas, and a little strip of a drought that's up there in the Dakotas as well there. So really, it's pretty hard to make much progress on drought relief in the wintertime, just because we don't get that much precipitation in the wintertime anyway. So, and if we do get it, it probably falls as snow. So it's a little trickier to recover, especially on the short time frames in the wintertime. This is the 3-month outlook through the end of April. And they're showing that a lot of that drought in the Kansas area and in the kind of the Missouri, Kentucky, southern Illinois area is still persisting in that area. But so they've got this large area in the southwest now that shows that drought removal is likely, and that's based on those forecasts we were looking at that showed the above-average precipitation across the southwestern United States. So I think they're expecting recovery there, including parts of Colorado, but the rest of the area is probably not going to budge too much in the next 3 months. So just kind of in summary here, as we wrap things up, in terms of what's happened so far, it's been a relatively quiet winter compared to last year. We had a fairly warm December, followed by a cold start to January. Looks like the next couple of days we're going to see a return to much warmer conditions, probably going to eat away at a lot of that snowpack or snow cover we have in the central region. We do have dry conditions in parts of Colorado and Kansas, as well as the northern plains, based on the precipitation of the last 30 and 90 days and some of the earlier numbers we've been looking at. And snowfall has been near to slightly below average across the region, nothing of real concern at this point. And probably the noteworthy feature on the Great Lakes is just that we've had higher lake levels, and we're just now starting to see the beginning of the icing up of the Great Lakes. In terms of the outlooks, kind of just broadly summarizing here, is in that February through April time frame, it's pretty much equal chances on across the region on temperature and precipitation, except for that increased chance of being cooler and wetter, especially in that Kansas-Colorado region. You step forward to the May-July period, it's, again, pretty much equal chances across much of the region, except there is that increased chance of the warmer conditions in the western half of the Midwest, or I guess it's the eastern half of the Midwest, I should say. And then August through October, it's pretty much equal chances, except for the increased chances of warmer conditions on the east and west coast. So here's some more information on the partners, and when we post this on the web, you can actually click on these links, and it'll actually be hot links to those websites. So one of the things I forgot to mention earlier is that some of these graphs that I showed were from the National Climatic Data Center, and they have this really nice monthly and annual summaries that they do on what they call the State of the Climate reports. And it does a nice overview of what's happening across the United States each month, and then for each year as well. So lots of great stuff on that website. Then we got the Climate Prediction Center, and of course the Climate Portal and the Drought Portal, and so forth there. So lots of good stuff there. And then finally, we're wrapping things up here, and we'll open it up for questions. And here's some of the experts that are going to be on today. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Bethany.
Okay. Any questions out there?
Hi, I have a question. This is Benjamin Diamond.
Go ahead.
Um, for the soil moisture anomaly, is there any strong signal towards drought in any particular region?
That's a good question. For this time of year, there's probably not too much in the central U.S. anyway with that. I mean, farther west you go, it probably becomes a little more consistent. If you kind of could divide up the central region there between the Midwest and the High Plains, the Midwest is usually fairly wet in the wintertime anyway, so it's even in a quiet year, they'll get plenty of precipitation. So there's usually a pretty nice recovery of any deficits in the soil moisture by the time you get into spring. In the western part, in the Great Lakes, the High Plains region and westward there, it's a little tougher. Once you fall behind a little bit, it's a little harder to catch up in the wintertime just because we don't get as much precipitation during those times of year. But I don't think there's too much concern. If you look at the drought relief maps, recovery maps there, they were showing that a lot of that was that areas that were in drought in the central region were going to recover because of the forecasted wetter conditions in the southwestern portion of the United States.
Okay, thank you. I have another question about the moisture situation in Texas. Well, is there any relief forecast? Any system bringing moisture there?
Let's see. Let me go back here. See, I wasn't paying too much. In the short term, there's in the monthly outlook, we're showing some improvements in a little bit of Texas, closer to the coastline or to the coast there than on later on. But overall, there wasn't a whole lot of expectation of at least short-term relief. And many parts, especially in the western part of Texas, they've been in drought for multiple years now. So it takes quite a bit of precipitation to catch things back up. But if you look at some of the forecasts, like here's the February through April outlook, they do have that area of increased chances of above-average precipitation extending into the western half of Texas. So they're probably going to it's not going to hurt them. I'll put it that way. They're not going to fall farther behind. But I don't think we're seeing any kind of short-term relief from them at this point.
I see. Okay. My other question was about the 2011 flood, how that led to the 2012 drought.
Yeah, that was quite an interesting contrast. We had very wet conditions, and actually in 2010 and 2011 across much of the central region there, and so we had a lot of too much water in the Missouri and Mississippi River basins there for an extended period of time. But then really starting in the winter of 2011, 2012, we started to get into much drier conditions across the region. And then on top of that, kind of in hindsight, it was more obvious that we had record high temperatures in the March time frame. And I think that really was kind of the start of the drying out of the central region there. So I think that was kind of probably where things started to fall apart. And then, at some point, the droughts can kind of maintain themselves once you dry out the soils. So there's a little bit of feedback there, so they can kind of continue on their own beyond that.
Okay.
So it wasn't like I guess maybe the short answer would have been, it really wasn't. It wasn't that the 2011 floods caused the 2012 drought. It's just that it was an interesting contrast that we went from one extreme to the other.
I see. Okay.
Okay. Are there other questions? Okay, if not,
One last question.
sure, go ahead.
What are the conditions in Canada right now? I know this is all the U.S., but is there any data out there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't been paying too close attention to Canada this year, so I'm not sure what's the story once you get north of the border. You know, all of these maps, the line stops right at the border. Although I would assume that if you kind of fill in the gaps there, I presume that the western part of Canada is probably would also be included in that area of increased chance of above average temperatures in the next 90 days or so. Because if you kind of look at the map there, you see the warm temperatures or the increased odds in the western part of the U.S. and then you got Alaska up there also with an increased chance of above average temperatures. So you can kind of imagine that many of the western provinces are probably also kind of expected to see that, but I have not looked at the official forecast for Canada to see what's going on up there.
Okay, thank you.
This is Diane Mankliger. I just have a question.
Go ahead, Diane.
Sure.
Hey, on your slides, you had one on the USGS stream flow, and there was a huge hole and stuff in the upper Missouri River Basin. And I was just wondering, are those just because they were iced over, or is there something going on?
Yeah, sometimes the I don't know what their official policy is, but sometimes those gauges kind of go in and out as once you get ice cover, the data isn't always valid. So I'm not sure if USGS filters those out or if they just don't just kind of turn them off for the wintertime. But yeah, and I know there's not as many the farther north you go as the kind of the higher density networks are more in the Midwest there, but yeah, so I'm not real sure, but I suspect that a lot of cases those may be, especially the smaller streams, actually are full of ice right now.
Yeah, I was just wondering. I just saw a big hole.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, well, with that, I will remind everybody that the next webinar will be on February 19th at 1 o'clock Central. I will thank you for your patience as I've stumbled around and with a couple of technical difficulties. And many thanks to Jim for the presentation.
Hey, Beth.
Yeah. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, I'm sorry I was on mute. This is Kevin Lau with the National Weather Service, and I wanted to respond to Diane's question about the USGS.
Sure, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, Jim is correct. What the USGS will do is they will continue to display stages on their websites for these DCPs or these river gauges, but they won't show flow. So you can go to USGS sites or web pages and actually see the stages, but they don't associate a flow with them. They'll put an ice qualifier on it. So that's why they're grayed out on that map.
All righty.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay. Any last words? All right. Well, thank you all for attending, and have a great day.
You too.
Yes,
Bye.
thank you.